We have a presentation by Mr. Tim Coyne of the Public Defender's Office concerning the establishment of the drug court in Shenandoah County.
Great.
Good evening. Thank you. This will unfortunately probably be a little more sobering message, but hopefully you'll, through the end of it, you'll see there is some hope and some of the efforts that we've been able to do. Try to bring you some information on drug treatment courts and how they've been operating up north in Winchester, Frederick, and Clark. There's really two parts to this presentation. The first part I'm going to turn over to Lauren Cummings, who is the Executive Director of the Northern Shenandoah Valley Substance Abuse Coalition, and presents an overview of the addiction crisis, as we termed it, in the Northern Shenandoah Valley. She was actually also served as the first drug treatment court coordinator back in 2016 and 17. But I'll turn it over to Lauren, and then I can talk afterwards about drug treatment courts.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for having us this evening. We really appreciate your time. I wanted to start really with just a positive story. So in April, we had a drug court commencement, and one of our folks, one of our graduates here, April Lance, stood before the court, and she said, quote, "Before today, I've never completed anything in my life but a prison sentence. Drug court saved my life." April, when she commenced, celebrated 14 months sober. She was in the program for 29 months. And while she was in the program, she obtained her driver's license. She was able to buy a new car. She built healthy relationships with her family, which is extremely important. And she has been one of 32 of the clients who have commenced from the Northwest Regional Adult Drug Treatment Court since 2016.
32 since, okay.
Yes, since 2016. So back in 2014, law enforcement in our area, and specifically from the task force, really started to notice an increase in overdoses in our region. And the statistics that I'm showing you here are for Frederick, Clark, Shenandoah, Page, Warren, and the city of Winchester. So between 2012 and 2013, you can see we went from 1 overdose death in 2012 to 21 overdose deaths in 2013. We saw a steady increase. We saw what we thought was going to be the highest number in 2017 when we hit 40 overdose deaths in our region. Of course, last year, we all know what happened with COVID. A lot of folks were isolated. This is a disease of isolation, so we saw an increase in those overdoses. This year, we stand at 19 fatal overdoses in our region compared to 33 at the same time last year. In addition to the opioid overdose deaths, there's also the reported non-fatal overdoses. These are individuals who have been saved by Narcan. And we always point out that this is the reported non-fatal overdoses because we know that there are a lot of overdoses that go not unreported. Obviously, laypersons now have access to Narcan, and we know that there are a lot of people who are saved by Narcan that are just being possessed by laypersons. So again, that increase between 2012 and 2013, we went from 18 overdose deaths, non-fatal overdoses to 100 non-fatal overdoses in our region. This year we stand at 131 compared to, we were at 202 for all of last year. The sheriff is going to go over the Shenandoah County numbers in just a moment. But I will tell you that 1 out of 7 individuals in our country suffers from a substance use disorder. 1 out of 10 individuals who have a substance use disorder are actually receiving the treatment that they need. And I always say, if that was true of any other disease, if 1 out of 10 with heart disease or 1 out of 10 with diabetes was receiving the treatment that they need, that would be unacceptable. And it's the same for substance use disorders as well. So the formation of a community coalition. Back in 2014, when law enforcement started to see that increase in overdoses in our region, they came to the table. They said, we have a problem. We can't arrest our way out of this problem. We have to come up with other solutions to address this issue. So 200 individuals came to a community leadership summit in April of 2014 that was held at Shenandoah University. We divided into our jurisdictions within that meeting. And so we had Winchester and Frederick in one room, and Shenandoah and Warren were in another. Page County was in one room. And we started to talk about what can we do about this issue. In the Winchester-Frederick room, I was in that room actually at the time. I was a public information officer for the Winchester Police Department. And again, law enforcement took the lead. Chief Kevin Sanzenbacher at the time took the lead and said, we have to do something about this. So anybody who's interested in being a part of the solution to this problem, place your business cards on this table. And he gathered them up and formed what we then called the Heroin Task Force. That has since evolved into what is now the 501c3 nonprofit organization, the Northern Shenandoah Valley Substance Abuse Coalition. So we formed that task force and really started to bring together community partners to help identify solutions to this problem. That group continues to meet on a monthly basis, the coalition group. We have our next meeting actually coming up this coming Thursday. So when we first formed, the executive committee or the board of the coalition went out to the localities and they said, this is the issue. Here is the data supporting that we have a serious issue with substance use disorders in our community. And here are some solutions to that problem. And the localities really grabbed onto this notion of a drug treatment court, which Tim and I are going to talk a little bit more about that. But the mission of our coalition is to collaborate with community partners to take the lead in identifying and developing effective resources to ensure that the necessary continuum of care for substance use and addiction services are available to all members of the community. We know that we can't do this alone. We have to collaborate with our community partners to really make a difference. So initially when the board went to the localities in Valley Health, each of those entities was able to commit a certain amount of money, a certain amount of seed money. Valley Health committed $60,000, the city of Winchester $60,000, Frederick County $60,000, and then Clark County, we won't pick on them, I'm from there, $15,000, for a total of $195,000. All of these entities has committed that amount of money annually since 2016. So I was hired in January of 2016 as the executive director of the coalition. My initial duty was to start a drug treatment court. We launched the drug court on August 16th of 2016. The goal of the program is to promote public safety. It treats substance use among nonviolent offenders. It provides comprehensive substance use treatment to those who have a substance use disorder and provides a high level of accountability. So we have provided 66% of our clients in the program a place to live with housing assistance. We have provided 79% of our clients with transportation assistance to drug court each week, to their treatment sessions, to probation and parole to get drug screened. One of the biggest parts of the program that I want to point out before Tim Coyne goes a little more in depth about the drug court program is that we really emphasize the need to give back to the community. In the fifth and final phase of our drug court program, our clients are required to do a community service project. Many of our clients have gathered donations for different nonprofits in our community. Some have given Christmas and other holiday gifts to children in need in our community. And it's just another way that we are teaching our clients to give back a community who is allowing them a second chance.
Thank you. So what is a drug treatment court? It isn't really a whole separate court. What it is it's a docket. It's a portion of the court's time that it devotes to dealing with these particular kinds of cases. The definition is in the Code of Virginia, and they're specialized dockets within the existing structure of the court system, offering judicial monitoring of intensive treatment and strict supervision of addicts in drug and drug-related cases. It basically takes the court system, criminal justice system, and combines it with treatment, and you have probation and supervision and community supervision to try to treat these cases differently than we are now, which is usually somebody has a drug offense of some kind, they may be found guilty, placed on given a jail sentence perhaps, and then placed on probation. And probation can do certain things, but the drug treatment court can do much more, and really addressing the needs of these individuals. So why this is important, and I don't know if these numbers are 100% accurate, Sheriff Carter has some probably updated numbers, but this just gives you an idea of just the number of drug offenses. These are drug and narcotic violations reported by the Virginia State Police. And these are numbers throughout the region, but the far left bar in each of 2018 and 19 is Shenandoah County. And each year that was 391 drug or narcotic violations reported. That's including the county and the towns. So that's more than one a day on average. And so these are the folks that then oftentimes will overdose, or need Narcan, or end up in the criminal justice system. So it is a problem throughout the region, throughout the country. So drug courts aren't anything new. They've been around since the late 90s. And currently in Virginia alone, there are 44 approved drug treatment court dockets around the Commonwealth. When I started looking into this back in 2016, think there were 29. So over even the last 5 years, the number has increased exponentially because jurisdictions, localities have realized this is effective. This is a way that we can deal with these cases that otherwise would end up in our court system or the jail. There are a number of different treatment courts, but we're only focused here on the adult drug treatment court. Just some real quick statistics. These are from 2020 on this statistics around the state. There were almost 1,300 referrals to drug courts, and of that number, 526 were admitted, so about 40%. So this is not for everybody. This just is, the localities set up the criteria, and there's strict criteria. They've got to be nonviolent offenses. A person can't have a violent offense in the last 10 years on the record. So not everybody that gets in, or that applies, gets in. The most common offenses at entry were drug possession, probation violations, and larcenies. Larcenies in there because a lot of addicts will steal to get money to support their habit. The graduation rate in 2020 was 41%, and the termination rate was 58%. It's a tough program, and that's what that termination figure indicates. It's hard to get through because so much is required of the individual, not just treatment, but there's supervision and other aspects to it that really make it difficult. But if they can get through, then they can really achieve some success. To give you some idea of comparing, we look at a lot, or how successful is this? And so they look at reconviction rates. What's the percentage of people that are going to be rearrested or actually reconvicted after serving a probation term or drug court? So the 3-year reconviction rate, so these are for graduates 3 years after they graduated, 17.6% were reconvicted of a crime. 27% of those terminated were reconvicted of a crime. But you have to compare that to what we normally do now, and that's probation. And so statewide, that same 3-year period, about 23.1% of the individuals who are placed on probation are going to be reconvicted and sentenced to more than a year in the penitentiary. In District 11, which is the district we are in for probation purposes, that figure is a little higher, 25%. Down south in Harrisonburg, they dropping in, that's 36.6%. So standard probation, that's what it's working. And again, compared to the drug court reconviction rate, it is lower. I'd say significantly lower. There was a study done back in 2012 by the Center for State Courts, that the Supreme Court commissioned it, and they concluded that, this is a long quote, but the bottom line is that with the lower outcome and victimization costs along with lower placement costs, drug treatment courts result in average savings of almost $20,000 per drug court participant over the cost of doing business as usual. We save money. You're not necessarily going to see that in year one, but because they've gotten so much treatment and they're able to address their addiction, get on the road to recovery, turn their lives around, they're able to produce and become productive members and not recommit crimes. That is just what the state would tell you. The savings estimated last year for FY 2020 is 621 participants exiting the program, almost $12 million in savings statewide based on those figures. So what does a court look like? So the drug treatment court, really the core of it is the team. And the team starts with a judge. Circuit court judge, recognized Judge Black is here. He's a circuit court judge here in Shenandoah County. And we've had some meetings with the judge and the sheriff and the Commonwealth attorney and some others, and very interested in exploring this program and trying to see if it would work. But it's not just the judge alone. The team also consists of a Commonwealth attorney, a public defender, a defense attorney, probation officer, a surveillance officer in the sheriff's department who actually goes out in the community and checks on the individuals. He goes to their home, goes to their work site, and then treatment. Treatment provider, case manager, and then there's a court administrator or coordinator. And these folks meet every week and discuss the cases and make recommendations to the judge to how to deal with the person as they go through the program, week to week. We have 5 phases in the program in the Northwest Regional Adult Drug Treatment Court. It's structured to take 15 to 18 months at a minimum. Most of our folks take much longer. We had a recent graduation where I think 2 of the graduates had been in the program for 29 months, almost 2.5 years. Ms. Lance, who was on the slide earlier, was in there for that long. But she came into the program after being released from a 3-year prison term in the state of Maryland, and then came through Winchester Federal Courts and was placed in our program. These are the various stages or phases that we deal with: stabilization, intensive treatment. They're all the way up through aftercare. Because what we want to do is really give all the participants the tools that they need to succeed once they get out of the program. There are requirements for weekly court appearances. There's urine screens 3 times a week in our program, random. We have work requirements, community service requirements, vocational training, education, and we really encourage pro-social activities, trying to get them to break that cycle, to change the people, places, and things that have always led them to use substances in the past, and to find periods of abstinence before they progress through the program. The court uses a system of sanctions and incentives to try to motivate people, but also to hold them accountable. So if there's a relapse, which we expect in the program, isn't necessarily going to lead to a jail sentence, but a continued violation of the rules, dishonesty, they're not progressing through, then that might result in a jail sentence. Not a long one, if you want to try to do it in small increments, to then have the program become more effective. And incentives are just that weekly interaction with the judge and before the court is just shown to be really very effective in trying to get on the right track. We target a high-risk, high-needs population. So these are folks that they're not high risk of violence, but they're at a high risk for reoffending. These are the people that are most likely to be back in the court system, back in the jails, costing money. RSW, the latest reports from 2019, it's $85 a day to house an inmate, so that's $30,000 to $31,000 a year to incarcerate someone. So these are the people that are at most at risk of being put back in jail, but also have a high need for treatment, because they're heavily addicted. They have substance use disorder. So these are the ones we're targeting. It's a tough population, and that's why it takes so long to get to the program. But the programs have been shown to provide the greatest benefits for that population. I'll just point out this individual picture here, graduated this year, was a former client of mine. He's 61 years old now, been using substances for over 40 years. Long-standing, just in and out of jails his entire life. He managed to stay sober for almost the entire time he was in the program. I don't think he had one positive, but it just took him a while to get his life back on track. Because once you deal with and address the addiction, then they have a lot of underlying problems that were designed and equipped to try to address and help. To give you some idea, we just had a recent evaluation done of our program. We're about 5 years in, and so that's a time when you want to see how you're doing. Our graduation rate was almost 42%, right in line with the statewide graduation rate. Our recidivism rate, now that's a smaller number because we had 43 participants studied. Our 2-year reconviction rate was about 20% compared to the state average of almost 15.5%. But the main thing is the program participants all reported numerous benefits and were overall positive about the program. I've talked to a number of individuals who have been terminated from our program. And just to follow up with them after that, and they still reported that receiving benefits from the program. And the treatment that they received are still things that they're going to carry with them even after the program is over. The bottom line I present to you is the drug treatment courts, they do work. They have better outcomes for criminal defendants who go through the system, and there are overall cost savings compared to doing business as usual. This isn't going to be for everybody. It's not a slap on the wrist by any means, because what the program requires is accountability, and holding the participants accountable, trying to give them the tools they need to succeed. Thank you.
Sure. And I just wanted to say, I met Mr. Coyne and Ms. Cummings back in 2014. You know, one of the issues when you've been around as long as I have, I think there's still only right now just myself and Sheriff Roper out of Clark County that were actually on the command board of the Drug Task Force at the time when 2014 was here. And one of the things that we'd been meeting with regularly and talking about was the issue of the heroin cases that we were working in our region. One thing that came out of that is the public meeting that he and Lauren talked about, which brought a large part of that community, the Winchester-Clark area community, together. And of course, we were part of that. And we had identified the heroin issue as a heroin epidemic at the time. It is still a major issue in our county, and I would say it's also still a major issue in Warren and Page County as well. And as far as I'm concerned, I think now is the time we need to seriously sit down and talk about this initiative. It's taken a long time to get here, but it's time. And also, quite frankly, my contact with Lauren and Mr. Coyne and what they've done in Frederick, Winchester, and Clark, it is a model that I think you need to pay serious attention to, because I think it's very effective. And I think if we were going to embark on such an initiative, I personally would look at their model and try to guide myself as much as I could through that, because they've been very successful. Just to give you some local numbers, Narcan administered, now we'll talk about what this means in just a minute, but as you can see over time, we're having more and more, I guess I wouldn't call it opportunities, but incidents where we are administering Narcan. This is what we know about. These are the calls that we're called to. This is Shenandoah County Sheriff's Office and EMS in Shenandoah County. And that's a reflection of basically this number here. These are your injuries and deaths. And as you can see, we're on track in 2021 to at least match 2020, if not exceed 2020. So COVID didn't slow anything down from a respect of people's heroin addiction. And that's another thing here. You know, I realize Judge Black probably, I don't know if he's going to speak this evening, but I will tell you one thing that I know regarding heroin addiction and people that are addicted to heroin. Jail is not a deterrent. It's an addiction. So not in the sense of, you know, as you think about, you know, criminal conduct, people are dealing with an addiction that they have to have other services to get through dealing with that piece of their life or what's controlling their life. But these are your heroin injuries and deaths over the last 4 years. And this is just another way to look at it in this particular chart. Again, that's really all I had to say this evening, other than to say that I support what they're doing. And I think the board should take a position that we need to start getting into how we can fund this and how we can get this initiative off the ground. In Shenandoah County, we'd be very supportive of it with the Sheriff's Office. And I know we're running into probably some grant deadlines that we would want to certainly meet this fall, and I'm sure Mr. Coyne or Lauren can speak to that if there was a specific question about that. So again, thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
Any questions here for anyone from the panel? Okay, yeah, excuse me, Judge Black,
I'll say a word. I know you guys have lots on your plate, but really we're here because I think I got the ball rolling. I can't keep the ball rolling, and thank goodness Sheriff Carter, Mr. Coyne, the others are actually trying to gain momentum here. But I think most of y'all know me, but if you don't, I practiced law here in Shenandoah County for about 31 years. When I started practicing law here, drug use and drug crimes were the minority of the docket. Now it's probably 80% of my docket. Mr. Pollack can tell you that. It's an epidemic. So I sat on the JDR bench for about 4 years. I've been on the circuit bench for a little over 2. One of the speakers said that law enforcement recognized you can't arrest your way out of this. I can tell you, you can't incarcerate your way out of it either. A lot of what I know is counterintuitive. It's experience-based, and I can tell you, I've tried about everything as far as incarceration to try to incarcerate a drug addict out of drug use, and all you have is whatever period of time I incarcerate them. When they're out of whatever the incarceration period is, they're exactly where they were when they went in. So it was clear to me that, and I thought about drug court even before I started on the circuit court, but it was clear to me that we can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. So drug court's a logical next step for the county. I think Mr. Coyne has shown you that it's economically viable. It actually makes more sense than just sticking somebody in jail. When they get out, you have a drug addict that's been in jail for, pick your time. I've tried all the different kinds of time, 6 months, 1 year, 18 months. Been doing this long enough to see him come back. It doesn't matter. It's not going to change the math. But what we know is the drug court gives the possibility of these people to actually have a different outcome. And so it's something to seriously consider. I think we don't have all these drug courts in the state because they don't work. We have them because they do work. And I think they're economically viable. And I think from the standpoint of leadership, that's something you really have to take a close look at. So, it's the old Fran thing, you can pay me now or pay me later, but with this, I think it's clear that the outcomes, they're not perfect, but they're better than what I've seen as a judge. So I would really appreciate your all serious consideration of this proposal. I think if we don't do this as a county, we're just doing the same thing, expecting what the definition of insanity, and do the same thing, expect a different outcome. There's not going to be a different outcome. The last thing I'll say is, so the people that I deal with that are drug addicted, and it's a huge percentage of people on my docket, most of those people don't want to be drug addicted, okay? So they became addicted one of two ways. They either through prescription drugs, or they made a bad decision. But once the hooks are in, and that's something that I don't think anybody here understands, or if you do, you've had exposure to people that are drug addicted. Once the hooks are in, they're in. It's unbelievably difficult to get the hooks out. And I'm not sure, how the hooks are removed, but most of these people that I see in court that I'm incarcerating don't want to do drugs. They understand, especially when I can give them a little time out, they understand that this drug choice was a bad choice, but you got to understand how addicted they are. And short of interventions like what the drug court would offer, the odds of them getting the hooks out of them without that intervention is almost zero. So we got to do something different. I appreciate your all's consideration of that. The people that have the knowledge have already spoken. I just know I have the frustration of knowing that I'm sitting there accomplishing nothing by incarcerating these people, except for keeping them alive. I do know that I can incarcerate them and keep them alive, but I'm just prolonging the inevitable. They're going to cycle back around, they're going to be out, and they're going to be drug addicts still. They're always probably going to be drug addicts, but they're going to go right back to using drugs. So anyway, appreciate your time. Didn't mean to even speak for that long, but I really hope you all, and I'm available at any time. I can give you anecdotal stuff, but I'll be happy to speak to anybody at any time about the need because it's there. Okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Any questions at this point in time, folks?
More logistical. It's obvious there seems to be, this is better than just business as usual. If we wanted to proceed with doing something like this, how do we do it? Whose belly button do we push? Is it on Evan to coordinate this, or does it fall to the sheriff? I don't know.
The sheriff, no, I'm just kidding.
Always the sheriff.
Well,
Always.
I think the concept tonight was really to kick off to the governing body what this is about.
Sure.
And to start a community conversation about it. I did hear there might be some upcoming grant deadlines that we were want to take advantage of that. I understand that the model in Frederick, Winchester, Clark is some coordinated for your office. So it seems like, we didn't talk about the Page County model, but it seems like this is a model that's proven its work. Page County model just got off the ground last year.
Yep,
Recently.
their first docket's was August 9th. They're hoping to have the first docket.
So I'm thinking that I'm speculating at this point, by the time we get through a grant cycle, this is really a fiscal, I'm guessing, maybe I'm wrong here, a fiscal year 23 budgetary issue or onboarding, and maybe we can advance it. I'm looking to you guys to say, does that sound like a reasonable time?
Probably would take at least a year.
Yeah, so I know the planning process for us took about 12 months.
And I think there's this group that comes together. This was more just a, hey, head nods around, this is a good idea for the community, talk about it some more, get it going. We've not necessarily committed anything in terms of monetary numbers, that's a budgetary decision, but no issues. I'm not hearing from the board saying, don't look at this further, don't talk.
No, I'm just trying to get an idea for what it would take to implement, time, cost, planning. Do we have the resources just from a facility perspective, personnel, et cetera?
I think there certainly would be personnel from a monetary standpoint. What I think I hear is that there's a potential for a reduction in the cost we pay to RSWs. So that may be a potential source, and maybe also grant funding available. But I think those are things that we determine, Tim, whichever Tim.
I can speak real briefly to that. So a lot of the cost of the people I put up there, they're already getting paid. The judge, I am, or one of my assistants, so there's no out-of-pocket cost for that. That's more in kind. The Commonwealth Attorney, we also had discussions with Ms. Wiseman, and she's supportive of the idea as well. So the real costs are coming in getting a coordinator in place. Treatment costs are real, but with Medicaid expansion, that's helped us offset our costs a great deal. A lot of these folks will qualify. And Northwestern Community Services is in a position, they offer the services in our court, and they're here in Woodstock, it's the same catchment area, and they've been approached, and they feel that they can provide the needed treatment services for the court. So a lot of the costs are in kind, but there is obviously a cost. We hope to have conversations with Valley Health as well. Can't speak for them, but to see if they're able and committed to also providing some support.
I hope I didn't come off as not enthused about it.
Right.
I just was curious what the time limit would be and what the needs would be to set it up, that's all.
Sure.
So the main new expense is mainly with a coordinator, is that right, Tim?
Yes, I would say getting the coordinator in place early, having done this now for a couple different jurisdictions, it's time consuming to get it all done. The coordinator can certainly be in place to help process. There's state application that has to go to the Supreme Court. There are grant opportunities out there that have to be applied for as well.
I would just add also that the seed money that initially was given was used as the match for the federal grant that we went after through the Bureau of Justice Assistance. So that amount of funding is very important in order to receive those federal dollars.
Then, and so who would be the worker that would start this ball rolling? I mean, would one of the first things we do would be to hire a coordinator to get things going? Is that the order of things?
That'd certainly be one of the initial steps in trying to get somebody in place, somebody who can serve that role.
And so where is the coordinator usually located? What agency?
So that remains to be seen.
Okay. But in other jurisdictions?
Other jurisdictions, Page County, their coordinator is being funded through their grant, the Bureau of Justice Assistance. They're a Page County employee. Page County then gets reimbursement from
It's a county?
from the feds.
Okay.
But as a county employee. In Winchester example, Lauren and our current coordinator are employees of Valley Health. And they're reimbursed, Valley Health is reimbursed for their
And
salaries.
where are you located?
We're located in Winchester. We're in the Timbrook House, which is directly across the street from the police department, Timbrook Public Safety Building.
Would you have an actual office or permanent location in Shenandoah County?
Well, so the coordinator would need a space.
That's what I mean.
Correct. The court itself is there. There's no additional cost to create the dock.
Mr. Chairman, we would have space in our new facility.
That's
I
my
mean,
next question,
if,
you know.
I mean, if you needed an office, there would be an office available in our facility, if that's the concern. The issue for us is the person and getting the county position. It would be report to the county or Valley Health or whoever is the entity that this person will report to. But if you needed a physical space, I think that's not going to be that difficult at this point.
Carl, we knew 4 years ago we need that space, remember?
Yeah.
And it would just be for circuit court, correct?
Correct. And there are other models I put up there, but we're just talking about on the adult court, circuit court level. Correct.
I'm kind of curious about the juveniles. There's always a small amount of those. But you see much, my first mindset is the earlier we can get them, the better we are. So I'm just kind of curious about the school divisions. I'll think about our young people.
Right. I know there are not as many juvenile court models. The juvenile court is structured a little differently in the juvenile court judge and Judge Black. The juvenile court judge had different powers, different things he could do by code, with treating juveniles. I think there were, 13 maybe around the state? And I'm not as familiar with that model. I haven't really seen one up front, up close.
And as it works,
Average age.
virtually everybody that goes through this long-term program has already been convicted, correct?
Yes, there are different models of who comes into the program. We're, what was it, 75%? We're 75% probation violators. So they've already been convicted, they're on probation. So,
But nobody's not convicted. In other words, isn't the legal system supposed to be pretty much over, and then you get into drug court to try to stay out of jail and stay clean? Isn't that how it's supposed to work?
if it's a probation violation, the judge will find they're in violation, but withhold final sentence. What's he going to do with that? And if they're successful, then there's no more time imposed. And you can remove them from probation or continue it for a brief time. We do have new offenses that come into the program as well, and sometimes those are dismissed, sometimes they're reduced, or they don't get, but the point is you don't get any additional time imposed.
There's a plea deal.
Yeah, see, but I believe, for instance, in Harrisonburg, that they want finality first. So different programs have different standards.
They have a different model that we use. Overall, the principles are the same, but their criteria are a little different, and how they administer it is a little different. Treatment's still a huge component. Drug treatment court.
Just real quick, does Department of Social Services come into play anywhere?
They do to some extent, but they're not as integrally involved with it.
Right at the front end, help them get them qualified for Medicaid, right?
Well, actually, Northwestern does the
Oh, is that-
qualification for Medicaid, but the social services can come into play with either, housing assistance, perhaps food vouchers or something like that, but they're not as
Not really
integrally
core
engaged.
group that you're talking about. Thank you.
Apparently with the information that you provided to us, across the state of Virginia, it has been a tremendous amount of success. What role does the state play as far as financing? If they see a good thing going, do they have the skin in the game? And so what part and for how long? There's a lot of, I think it has a lot of merit, don't get me wrong. I think you need to look at it long and hard. But I'd just like to know exactly how the other court systems have been financially successful with the possibility of getting state funding.
There is an amount of state funding that has increased over the last several years. When we started, it had been stagnant for 10 years. The General Assembly said, okay, $3 million all they're going to allot, and that was billed out to certain courts. It has now opened up. We get 65.
We're up to 90.
We received $90,000 in the state grant that helps provide a peer support person, a case manager, and some peer support.
Correct.
Okay? So the state is able to contribute some, and there is more money. The state has stepped up, and we are providing more funds than we apply for.
Do you think it's because from 2016 into 2021, that the state of Virginia and the powers to be see that this has been a successful program in the state, and they want to be a part of it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so basically, we're going to be better on the ground floor than you all were in 2016 financially.
I think it's
Yeah.
the state funding aspect, absolutely. It's much stronger than it was when we started. That's why we had to rely on the local funding primarily.
And I'm not saying I wouldn't support without state funding, but if the state funding's out there, I think we need to give it a good hard look.
Absolutely, and we do in Winchester. We receive a substantial amount. In fact, that's doubled since over the last several years. We had 45,000 at one point, now we're at 90. So there are opportunities there.
Thanks, sir.
And speaking of funding, I think the sheriff can tell us that for every day that a drug court keeps a defendant out of RSW, that saves county taxpayers a certain amount of money, correct? That
Right.
varies every year.
Right.
But do you know what that figure is today?
Not off the top of my head.
It was what I was able to find. 2019 Comp Board report is about $80.
Very, very accurate.
And And so theoretically, this program, for every day it keeps one of our citizens out of jail, arguably saves our citizens $85, or approximately.
Yeah, and if you could get the data, I mean, if you really want to drill down, there's probably a savings to social services and other human health services being provided ultimately. So, yeah.
But that's a pretty direct.
And measurable, yeah.
You know, well, I mean, it's to some degree. I mean, you know, Judge Black's not going to get up and say, well, hey, I would have given this person X number of days in jail, but for the fact that he successfully saved in drug treatment. But it can save us some serious money.
Right, these are folks that could have lost their kids, for example, or have a kid taken, removed, for
Oh,
a period of time, and social services has to.
And we know that can cost us a lot of money.
Kim, could you get the board a hard copy of your presentation?
Absolutely.
I mean, I'd like to sit down and digest it a little bit. It's good information, I just couldn't comprehend it all at once.
We have a lot more, but we wanted to sort of kind of not throw too much at you, but absolutely, we can get a copy to you. Thank you all for your time.
Okay, consider